The history of science is often written as a series of lightning strikes, moments of pure, unadulterated genius where the clouds part and a single brilliant mind perceives the machinery of the universe. We are told stories of apples falling on heads and bathtubs overflowing with displacement. But the most enduring myth of the 20th century was cemented on a cold December day in 1962 in the gilded halls of Stockholm. The King of Sweden stood ready to bestow the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine, the ultimate accolade for human achievement. Standing before him were three men, James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins. They were the victors. They were the men who had cracked the code of life itself, revealing the double helix structure of DNA to a world hungry for answers. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation for the fathers of modern genetics. In the textbooks and the popular imagination, this moment represents the triumph of theoretical deduction.
The legend goes that Watson and Crick, two dashing young mavericks at Cambridge University, simply guessed right. We picture them in their casual tweed jackets, sipping tea and shuffling cardboard cutouts of molecules until the pieces magically clicked into place. It is a romantic image, the power of pure thought overcoming the chaos of biology. It suggests that they saw what no one else could see because they were simply smarter, more intuitive, more daring than their peers. They were the golden boys of the biological revolution, and the 1962 ceremony was their coronation. However, if you look closely at the footage of that ceremony, or if you scrutinize the timeline of their discovery, the silence is deafening. There is a ghost in the room, a fourth chair that sits empty. The narrative of the flash of genius was not just a simplification, it was a convenient shield. It protected them from a far uglier truth.
The reality is that for months leading up to their breakthrough, Watson and Crick were not soaring on the wings of intuition. They were crashing against the rocks of failure. They were stuck. Their early models were disastrously wrong. They had proposed a triple helix with the sugar phosphate backbone on the inside, a structure that was chemically impossible, a structure that would have fallen apart under its own weight. They were humiliated by their peers. They were told to stop building models. They were working in the dark, fumbling for a light switch they couldn't find. History has preferred to forget that their sudden, miraculous leap from failure to immortality didn't come from their own data. They didn't run the experiments. They didn't endure the radiation. They didn't spend the sleepless nights analyzing diffraction patterns. The guess that won the Nobel Prize wasn't a guess at all. It was an answer key provided by someone else. The golden myth of Watson and Crick relies entirely on the erasure of the person who actually held the map. While the world celebrated the three men on that stage, the true architect of the genomic age was already in her grave, her name reduced to a footnote, her contribution dismissed as mere technical assistance. This was not a victory of shared knowledge, it was a victory of access. The prize was won not just by what they knew, but by what they took. And to understand the magnitude of this theft, we must leave the applause of Stockholm and descend into the damp, hostile basement of King's College London, where the real work was being done. The Secret in the Dark Room. London, 1952. While Cambridge buzzed with the theoretical debates of Watson and Crick, the atmosphere at King's College was heavy, serious, and thick with the tension of the post-war era. Down in the basement laboratories, amidst the hum of X-ray tubes and the smell of photographic chemicals, stood Rosalind Franklin. She was 32 years old, a woman of formidable intellect and uncompromising standards. In the boys' club of mid-century science, she was an anomaly, a difficult woman who refused to shrink into the background. She wasn't there to be an assistant. She was there because she was one of the finest crystallographers in the world. She understood the architecture of atoms better than almost anyone alive. Franklin was chasing the same ghost as the men at Cambridge, but she wasn't guessing. She was looking. She was methodically refining a technique called X-ray crystallography, a process that required the patience of a saint and the precision of a diamond cutter. She worked with the DNA fibers, hydrating them, pulling them into impossibly thin strands, and bombarding them with radiation. It was dangerous work. The equipment was primitive by modern standards, leaking invisible poison into the room, but Franklin was relentless. She spent hundreds of hours in the dark, adjusting the camera by fractions of a millimeter, waiting for the invisible to reveal itself. And then she got it. Photo 51. It is a hauntingly beautiful image, a fuzzy black and white halo with a stark, perfect X radiating from the center. To the untrained eye, it looks like a smudge. To a crystallographer, it screamed the secret of life. The X was the unmistakable signature of a helix. The spacing of the dark spots revealed the dimensions of the latter. It was the smoking gun. It was the proof that the structure of DNA was a double helix, held together by specific forces. Franklin had captured the blueprint of humanity on a piece of film. She stored it in her files, preparing to run the mathematical calculations that would undeniably prove the structure. She was a scientist of integrity. She would not publish until she was certain. But she was surrounded by men who did not share her scruples. Her colleague, Maurice Wilkins, treated Franklin not as a peer, but as a subordinate who needed to be managed. He mistook her intensity for hostility. Frustrated by her independence and perhaps threatened by her competence, Wilkins committed the act that would change history. Without Franklin's permission, without her knowledge, he opened her files. He took photo 51. On January 30, 1953, James Watson visited King's College. He was desperate. His own research was stalling. Wilkins, seeking an ally in his frustration with Franklin, pulled the stolen photo from a drawer and showed it to Watson. The effect was instantaneous. In his memoir, Watson later wrote, "The instant I saw the picture, my mouth fell open and my pulse began to race." He didn't need to do the math. Franklin had already done the work. The image was the answer key. He saw the helix. He saw the dimensions. He saw the future. Watson didn't thank Franklin. He didn't rush to her office to congratulate her. He rushed back to Cambridge to tell Crick. They had the dimensions now. They knew the pitch of the helix. They knew the distance between the bases. They didn't generate a single datum themselves. They simply built a model that fit Rosalind Franklin's picture. While she continued her meticulous calculations in the dark, unaware of the violation, the men who would become legends were busy constructing their fame on the foundation of her stolen labor. The Dark Lady's Vindication. The injustice culminated on April 25, 1953, when the journal Nature published the findings that would define the century. The layout of the articles was a masterclass in academic maneuvering. The lead paper was by Watson and Crick, presenting their model of the double helix with confident swagger. It was a theoretical triumph, elegant and simple. Buried deeper in the issue were the supporting papers, including one by Rosalind Franklin and her student Raymond Gosling. To the scientific community, it appeared as though Franklin's data merely provided experimental confirmation for the brilliance of Watson and Crick's idea. The chronology had been deliberately inverted. The data that inspired the model was presented as if it had come after the model. The theft was concealed by the formatting of a page. Franklin, unaware of the extent to which her specific image had guided them, accepted the situation with characteristic stoicism. She moved on. She left the hostile environment of King's College and turned her brilliance toward the structure of viruses, doing pioneering work on the tobacco mosaic virus and the polio virus. She was a force of nature, publishing 17 papers in 5 years. But the invisible danger she had courted in the lab, the X-rays that allowed her to see the building blocks of life, likely exacted their price. In 1956, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She worked through the pain, through the treatments, until the very end. She died in 1958 at the age of 37. The Nobel Prize is never awarded posthumously. When Watson, Crick, and Wilkins stood on that stage in Stockholm in 1962, Rosalind Franklin was 4 years dead. They accepted the accolades, the fame, and the history book's adoration. In their acceptance speeches, her name was barely whispered, if spoken at all. But the erasure didn't stop with silence. In 1968, James Watson published his memoir, The Double Helix. In it, he caricatured Franklin as the Dark Lady, a dowdy, unimaginative, and bellicose obstructionist who hoarded data she couldn't understand. He mocked her appearance, her lack of lipstick, her refusal to be charmed by him. It was a final, petty act of character assassination against the woman whose work had made him famous. But history, unlike people, has a way of correcting itself. The archives have opened. We have found Franklin's notebooks. They proved that she had independently solved the structure of the A form and B form of DNA. She had recognized the symmetry. She had calculated the density. She was not a confused technician. She was a visionary who was beaten to the finish line because her competitor started the race from her own starting block. Today, we must rewrite the caption under the double helix. It is not just the discovery of two men in Cambridge. It is the legacy of a woman who stood in the dark and captured the light. We restore her name, not to victimhood, but to power. She found the secret of life. They stole it. But the truth, like the genetic code itself, is resilient. It survives. And finally, purely, it belongs to her. Rosalind Franklin, the true architect of us all.